In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, more than 1,000 miles from any shore, 20 men watched the impossible happen. A whale, calm, deliberate, enormous, turned and aimed itself at their ship. It was not fleeing. It was not wounded into a frenzy. It was hunting them back. And what it set in motion would become one of the most harrowing survival stories ever recorded. A story so terrible that the men who lived it could barely speak of it for the rest of their lives. A story that would one day inspire the greatest sea novel ever written. But the novel ends where the real nightmare only begins. This is the true story of the whaleship Essex. In the summer of 1819, the Essex sailed out of Nantucket, a small island off the American coast that had made itself rich on a single, brutal trade: whale oil. In an age before electricity, the world ran on it. Whale oil lit the lamps of cities, lubricated machines, and burned clean and bright in millions of homes. And to get it, men sailed to the ends of the earth. The Essex was old but respected, commanded by a young captain named George Pollard. His first mate was a tough, capable sailor named Owen Chase. Among the crew was Pollard's own teenage cousin, a boy named Owen Coffin. Their plan was simple and merciless: sail to the rich hunting grounds of the South Pacific, kill as many sperm whales as they could find, and come home heavy with oil. They expected to be gone for 2 years or more. For over a year the voyage went, as voyages did. Long stretches of empty water, broken by the violent chaos of the hunt. The men chased whales in tiny open boats, drove harpoons into living mountains of flesh, and survived. By November of 1820, the Essex had pushed far out into the Pacific, into some of the loneliest water on the planet. They were near the equator, thousands of miles from the coast of South America. On the morning of the 20th, lookouts spotted spouts on the horizon. The boats were lowered. The hunt began like 100 hunts before it. No one felt the slightest sense of dread. But out among the pod was something the crew had never seen: an enormous bull sperm whale, far larger than the rest. Later the survivors would estimate it at 85 feet, nearly as long as the Essex itself. It lay quietly on the surface, watching. Then it began to move, not away from the ship, but straight toward it, gathering speed with each powerful stroke of its tail. On deck, Owen Chase saw it coming and could not believe his eyes. A whale did not do this. Whales fled. Whales fought the boats that attacked them. They did not charge a ship. The impact was catastrophic. The whale struck the Essex head-on with a force that stopped the entire vessel dead in the water and threw men off their feet. Timbers cracked. The ship shuddered like a living thing. And then, as if to be certain, the whale surfaced again a short distance away. It turned, and it came back for a second time, faster than the first. The second blow shattered the bow. Water roared into the hull. In the space of minutes, the proud whale ship that had crossed half the world began to sink beneath her own crew. The whale vanished into the deep and was never seen again. It left behind 20 men, 3 small open boats, a few salvaged scraps of food and water, and an ocean that stretched in every direction toward nothing. The nearest known islands lay to the west, and the wind itself wanted to carry them there. It was the obvious choice. It might have saved them all. But Captain Pollard and his officers were terrified of those islands. Sailors' rumors said they were home to cannibals, that to land there was to be eaten alive. So they made a decision that would doom most of them. Instead of running with the wind to the nearest land, they would fight against it and sail thousands of miles for the distant coast of South America. It was a choice between a danger they imagined and a danger they could not yet comprehend. They turned their tiny boats toward the open sea and rationed their food down to almost nothing. The horror did not come all at once. It came slowly, in the cruelest possible way. Day after day after day of blistering sun, empty horizon, and a thirst that nothing could relieve. Their bread, soaked in seawater during the wreck, turned to salt in their mouths and made the thirst worse. Their lips cracked, their tongues swelled, their bodies began to consume themselves. Storms scattered the boats and soaked the men to the bone. Calm left them baking and motionless. The ocean offered them everything except the 2 things they needed: water and an end to the journey. Weeks passed. The strongest men grew weak. The weak began to die, and the survivors faced a question that no one says aloud until there is no other word left to speak. The first deaths were almost a mercy. The men buried their companions at sea, committing the bodies to the water with what little ceremony their failing strength allowed. But as more died and the living grew skeletal, the calculation changed. They were starving to death, surrounded by the only food that remained. the bodies of the men who had already gone. When the next man died, they did not give him to the sea. With trembling hands and broken hearts, the survivors did the unthinkable. To live, they began to eat their dead. They told themselves it was the only way, that the dead would have wanted the living to survive. And for a time it kept them alive. 3 boats, drifting apart, each crew sinking deeper into a nightmare without a bottom. 1 boat was lost entirely, swallowed by the vastness, never seen again. The 2 that remained pressed on, their crews shrinking week by week, the bodies of the dead carrying them a few more days at a time. And then came the moment that would haunt the survivors more than anything else. In Captain Pollard's boat, the dead were gone, and the living were still dying. There was no body left to share. So the men did the only thing their desperate logic allowed. They agreed to draw lots. They would choose, by chance, 1 man to die so that the others might eat and live. Slips were prepared. The men drew, and the lot fell on the youngest among them, Owen Coffin, the teenage boy, the captain's own cousin. Pollard was horrified. He offered to protect the boy, to take his place, to stop it by force. But Owen Coffin had drawn the lot, and the boy himself refused to let another die for him. He laid his head down and told them it was his fate. A second lot was drawn to decide who would carry it out, and the crew did what they had sworn to do. It is impossible to imagine what those men carried in their hearts after that. They were no longer simply trying to survive. They were trying to live with what survival had cost them. The remnants of the 2 boats drifted on through a world of salt and silence. The men, barely conscious, more dead than alive, kept moving by nothing but the faint animal refusal to stop. More than 90 days after the whale destroyed their ship, a sail appeared on the horizon. To the skeletal men in the boats, it must have seemed like a hallucination. The first survivors were found by a passing ship, so wasted and unrecognizable that the rescuers were shaken to their core by the state of them, and by what they found in the bottom of the boat beside them. Captain Pollard's boat was rescued separately days later by another vessel. The men aboard were so far gone that they did not even react to being saved. They were found sucking the marrow from the bones of their dead companions. Of the 20 men who had sailed away from the sinking Essex, only 8 came home. The rest were lost to the sea, to starvation, or to the terrible arithmetic of survival. The survivors returned to Nantucket, a town built on whaling where everyone understood the ocean's cruelty, and where, by an old and silent code of the sea, no one openly condemned what they had done to stay alive. Captain George Pollard went back to sea, as whalers did, but fate was not finished with him. His next ship also wrecked, and he came home a second time as the captain who had lost 2 vessels. No owner would ever trust him again. He spent the rest of his long life on dry land as a night watchman, walking the dark streets of Nantucket alone, and once a year locking himself away to mourn the boy he could not save. First mate Owen Chase survived and did something the others could not. He wrote it all down, a plain, unflinching account of the wreck, the whale, the boats, and the things they had been forced to do. Years later, that small, grim book fell into the hands of a young sailor-turned-writer named Herman Melville. He read the story of the Essex and of the whale that hunted a ship, and he never forgot it. From that true horror, Melville built a novel about a captain, a crew, and a monstrous white whale named Moby Dick. The world remembers the legend. Far fewer remember that it began with real men in real boats, because the novel ends with the ship going down. But for the men of the Essex, the sinking was only the first page. The real story was the 90 days that followed, the days the world prefers not to look at too closely. They were ordinary men who set out for oil and money, and who were carried, one impossible decision at a time, to the very edge of what a human being can survive and still call themselves human. The whale that sank them seemed to act with intention, as if the hunted, just once, had decided to hunt back. And in doing so, it wrote a warning the sea has never stopped repeating, that out there, beyond the safety of the shore, the ocean owes us nothing. It does not forgive, it does not forget, and it is always patiently watching to see how far we are willing to go to live.